Good evening, folks. Just to let you know that we're having some informal discussions here live in the meeting room, and we'll get started with a formal presentation right at 5:45 sharp. So thank you. Good evening, folks. For those of you who joined us online, we'll be starting a formal presentation at about 5:45. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to say welcome. Thank you for coming out to the final public meeting for the Stormwater Master Plan. My name is Richard Zion, and I'm with Flagler County Engineering. If you all wouldn't mind, please sign in and pick up a public comment form and a copy of the agenda as you enter. Any of these materials are also going to be made available online through our county website. This evening, we're going to cover the Stormwater Master Plan, the preliminary plan that we've put together, and I'm accompanied here with our consultant, Geosyntec, who is Mark Ellard, and I'm going to turn this over to him.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, everybody, for coming out. And I do understand there's probably a number of people online watching this, so welcome to those folks as well. We're going to spend a little bit of time going through a presentation that describes what the Stormwater Master Plan is and what we have done and what the results and the recommendations that are being made to the county, because we are nearly at the tail end of this. I will say also, as Richard mentioned, there are ways to get in contact with you here live. There's comment forums, but for those watching online, there's also information available on the website. And I'll have a slide later that I will leave up that has contact information as well. So our meeting goals tonight. Well, first off, let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Ellard. I'm a senior principal with Geosyntec Consultants. The consultant prepared the master plan. I'm the project manager, and I thank you for attending the meeting tonight. So our goals tonight are going to be provide an update on the project, where we're at, and we are in the tail end of the project. We're going to review the scope of work, kind of touch on what the Stormwater Master Plan entailed, what it contained, discuss project recommendations, what we're recommending moving forward, talk about the schedule here, wrapping things up, and then solicit final input from the public and stakeholders. For the folks here that are here live, you can have the opportunity after the presentation to come up, make a public comment statement, or we'll have an informal period where you can discuss with us and staff, any questions you have. And likewise, the folks that are online will have that contact information on how you can provide some input as well later in the presentation. So why is this project important? When we talk about a stormwater master plan, what's important about this? Well, one thing is Flagler County is a destination county. This is a place where a lot of people are moving, and they want to have good quality water resource. They want to be free from flooding. They want to have good water quality because recreational and usage of the surface waters, the intercoastal, the various lakes is very important. What we don't want is what we see on this picture here. You have a couple pictures of flooding. This is from recent storms in Flagler County, where obviously there's some inundation that made life difficult for some folks. But on the water quality end, we don't like to see what's in the lower picture as well. Now, thankfully, that's not Flagler County. It's some of your neighbors to the south. But nevertheless, we want to have that resource, that surface water quality resource that's pristine, as pristine as possible. So that takes effective management of stormwater, and the county has a program which is put in place to be able to do that. Now, that includes, as we mentioned, dealing with flood risk, with water quality, but also the maintenance of infrastructure. There's a lot of stormwater drainage infrastructure. These are the pipes, the culverts, the stormwater ponds that you see as you're driving around the neighborhood. Those need to be maintained so that they can function properly to meet those flooding and water quality objectives. And there's the idea that this needs to be done in a fiscally responsible way. You'd have to feel that the county is spending the taxpayers' money and other money that they get, wisely and with a high cost benefit for what's being done. And there's also this idea of sustainability and resiliency, which are two words that are used a lot lately. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's the idea of how this plan can mesh and blend with the environment, the needs of the environment, but also protect the resources of the county into the future with potential changing conditions. So we talked about why it's important. Here's why we need a specific plan of action for the master plan. So the county operates and maintains the stormwater system. As mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about the various pipes and infrastructure and hundreds and thousands of things, but they collect and treat stormwater, and they need to be working properly, and that takes resources, time, and money. And there's the public health and safety and welfare aspect of it. The county is responsible for making the public safe and healthy, and stormwater is a big part of that, making sure it's managed correctly. With regard to infrastructure, as the county has developed over the past decades, a lot of the drainage infrastructure has become old and aged and needs replacement. So there's this idea of making sure to stay on top of what needs to be replaced to, again, make sure things are operating correctly. And some of the infrastructure needs to be modernized. I would say in the last few decades, the art, if you will, of stormwater management has moved forward quite a bit. And the things we're doing 30 years ago when I started in the business are quite different than now. We're more sophisticated and have the ability to manage stormwater better. So there's the idea of modernizing some of the infrastructure and the way we do things. A lot of the existing infrastructure, we're talking about both new infrastructure that may be coming with development, but also existing infrastructure that needs to be replaced, that needs to be retrofitted for resiliency. We'll talk a little bit about things that are projected to change in the future, sea level rise, change in hydrology, and those things could put a stress on the facility, so that needs to be looked into. A couple other interesting things. The county is now becoming a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permittee for municipal separate stormwater sewer systems. Now, that's a mouthful to basically say that they are now have grown to the size to be under the umbrella of some additional regulatory considerations. Now, this NPDES permit program comes down from the EPA. It's administered from the state Florida Department of Environmental Protection to be able to guide local municipalities on how to manage their stormwater program, not only from a project standpoint for infrastructure, but how they actually manage the internal resources and processes. So the county was informed they would be becoming part of this process right about the same time as we started this project. So we're able to help put together some information that we're collecting and work in a concurrent manner to help that as well. Now, there's also the idea of flooding and floodplains. If you live in the county and you're in a regulatory floodplain that's delineated by FEMA, then you may be paying flood insurance. That's an important program. It is noted that with the National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System, there's a program by which communities can get involved in this, and if they meet certain criteria, that can provide actually a discount for flood insurance for folks. So Flagler County went and moved forward with this, doing a stormwater master plan, and having that as a document is an important part to get credit in that system. Also, the idea of a plan is just to have a plan to know what to go forward, where it makes sense to spend money on projects and things. Without a plan, you can go about things in not a very organized way. So this is a way to organize things moving forward for the county. So obviously, hope you get the idea that there's a lot of facets to the stormwater management. We like this graphic in this slide here because it talks about a typical stormwater program and all the different things and elements that it has to cover. There's the flooding, which normally people think about. It's the stuff you see most of the impacts, but there's also the water quality, regulatory compliance. There's a number of state and federal regulations and water management district regulations that need to be followed. Also, the idea of operations and maintenance. Again, we'll talk about this, the operation of the facilities that on a day-in, day-out basis manage stormwater. And then there's the idea of this resiliency and how well we can work and protect things moving forward in the future. So we've broken the master plan into these different elements, covering each of these bases to come up with a holistic plan in the end. Now, one of the things, before digging into the technical aspects of it a little bit, I will say part of this process is very important is also getting the public on board and hearing from the public problems, issues, concerns, questions. Now, we had an initial public meeting back in February 2022 here in this room here, and also a follow-up one about a week later. That was to introduce the project to people, present the scope, and solicit input on flooding. We got a lot of comments, over 30 comments from folks that were able to capture the master plan, document, follow up on during the process. And that was very important so that the folks were here, and we did learn quite a bit from that. So fast forward now to today, we're here at the final public meeting, and this is to solicit final input. We're going to present the results, some of the recommendations that are moving forward, and give people the opportunity to, again, ask questions, and then we can capture that information. We'll mention also we have interaction with the County Board of County Commissioners. This morning we had a workshop with them, or actually earlier this afternoon, and we will, at the conclusion of the project, once everything is tied up with a bow, also have a final meeting with them as well. So that way we have input from all the stakeholders. Now let's start talking a little bit about some of the details, the technical details of stormwater. We talked about stormwater and not assuming everybody knows exactly what we're talking about. It's essentially when rain happens, it falls on the ground, the runoff that occurs that goes into the curbs and gutters and ditches and swales that needs to be managed. And if it's not managed properly, you can start having the problems with flooding, with water quality. And so this slide shows a bit of data of some of the very important characteristics that influence stormwater runoff and management. Here on the left is topography. And we're very fortunate at the beginning of this project to have the state provide very detailed topography. That's the elevations of the land surface. So what that influences is the rate of runoff and the storage of runoff. Water, including stormwater, wants to go from a high area to a low area. And so managing it properly as it makes its way from high to low is important. So topography and the elevation land surface is very important. We also have soil types. So in the middle, we have a map of different, and I will go back to the topography. Just to orient you to that figure, you see a lot of colors in there. The white areas are higher in elevation, and the darker red are higher in elevation. And then the lower areas are the light greens and the light blues. So over near Crescent Lake or to the east by the intercoastal, those are the lower areas. Now, moving to the middle map, soil types also affect the rate of runoff. The difference in soil types affects the ability of rainfall to be absorbed by the soil before it starts creating runoff. So you can have very sandy, deep water table soils, which can absorb a lot of rainfall. Or alternatively, you can have a very high water table, mucky soils, which tend to generate runoff very quickly. Recognizing the difference in those in different areas dictates different stormwater management strategies. So soil is very important for rainfall, infiltration, and percolation capacity. Now, if you look at this map, you can, again, see a lot of colors, a lot of varied differences throughout the county. The blue areas are really kind of very well perking sandy soils. The green areas somewhat as well, but you get down to the oranges and reds, and those are some of those high water table, more soils that create more runoff. So knowing where those areas are is important. Now, on the right is a land use map. Now, the importance of land use is really a function of what we call the impervious nature of the particular land use. And what we're talking about by impervious areas are the hard surfaces, pavements, buildings, roads, the things that prevent rainfall from infiltrating into the soil. So the higher the imperviousness, the more urban, another way to say it, the area is, the more runoff you may have for a particular area and the more need for stormwater management. So again, in the colors in the map, a lot of variation through the county, but the red areas are the more urban or suburban or developed areas. But you get to some of the green and lighter blue areas, those are some of the wetlands and water bodies, and some of the brown are some of the agriculture areas. So again, a lot of variation throughout the county, and important to understand. Now, next we'll talk about is floodplains. And floodplains are the flood-prone areas that have been delineated or identified throughout the county. Now, FEMA, the federal agency, delineates floodplains throughout the country, and particularly in Florida. And here is an excerpt from the data that they have generated for Flagler County. So on the right, you have a map that shows flood-prone areas delineated by FEMA. The dark blue areas are areas that have a particular flood elevation associated with them. And what this is used for often is, if you're going and building a new home, you want to build your home to an elevation higher than that. And there's code and county code that dictates that. The bluer areas are floodplains that don't have a base flood elevation, but they're delineated areas of risk nonetheless. So the impact of this dictates whether people are required to have flood insurance or suggested that they have flood insurance. And so it's important that we also look at these flood-prone areas as part of the puzzle of evaluating stormwater management in the county. Now, I will say the maps that are shown here with FEMA were last updated in 2018, so they are fairly recent and in more detail than had previously been available. Now, another opportunity that we have during the project is, after looking at the data which affects stormwater management on a physical and environmental standpoint, is to dig into what dictates how it's managed from a regulatory side. So we have the opportunity to do a regulatory review. Now, what that means is that we look at the various county information sources that are available, the comprehensive plan, which dictates actions and elements and things for the county to follow, but then also the land development code, that's the LDC, which dictates how development occurs. Review those along with regulations that also affect stormwater management from the St. John's Water Management District and even the DOT. And what we're looking for is we're focused on concurrency. By that meaning, do these regulations play well with each other? Is there any inconsistencies between them that we may point out? Are there, because some of the language may be old, whether there's some enhancements or recommendations for improving it and making it better, particularly with the onset of some newer stormwater management regulations that are now being in the process be promulgated from the state of Florida standpoint. So another little part of this puzzle we also did was look at the impacts of new development. We looked at where some of the newer development, the larger developments are coming in, they're already starting or where they're planned, and be able to say, are there particularly unique issues, geographical things that we can look at that may be good to start thinking about now or looking at from a regulatory side to kind of get ahead of the curve of some of the development. Now, another piece of information that's very important, and I can't overemphasize, is drainage infrastructure is just knowing where it is. Again, as I mentioned before, as you drive around, you'll see the swales, or hopefully you're noticing the swales and the ditches and the pipes that manage these facilities, and they all have to work well to prevent flooding, to manage stormwater. So one of the, again, foundational elements of information that this plan provided was the opportunity to go and look at detail at where this infrastructure is, do an inventory. Now, the county had a starting point of this information in a digital on a computer format. We were able to use some resources and go and try to attempt to look at every pipe, every inlet, every piece of infrastructure, and within county maintained areas and beyond to fill out this data set, because the knowledge of where this information is very important. I will say that a lot of the focus of this master plan, of course, is in county areas. However, stormwater doesn't stop at jurisdictional lines. It continues over the city limits and back and forth. There was quite a bit of inventory in a lot of areas, which will probably benefit to the county as a whole. So if you look at this map, what we're talking about as far as drainage inventory is things like structures. These are inlets, manholes, catch basins, pipes or culverts that are often connected to those facilities, but channels, but also bridges. So there's a lot of data, shown in this map that shows red dots for bridges and orange channels, but you can kind of get a sense of the pretty complex connectivity of a lot of this stuff, which is good to have a hold on moving forward. In fact, over about 10,000 structures, 5,000 pipes were digitized. That's a lot of stuff and a lot of infrastructure that the county needs to be concerned with and worry about. Now, having this helps to obviously understand the inventory of drainage assets, but then also is a piece of the puzzle to trying to be more proactive in maintaining infrastructure. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Better quantify the needed resources of, okay, we have a better handle on this, we have this much stuff, so it's going to take this many people and this much equipment to do it. And then there's also the idea of identifying easements needed to perform activities. Easements is very important if you're not familiar with it. The county needs legal rights to go and maintain drainage facilities. Whether along the side of a road, they would typically have right-of-way, but in some areas, private areas or outfall areas, if the county is going to be able to maintain those areas, which there's an advantage to doing so in many cases, they need to have legal rights or an easement to be able to go onto the property and maintain them. And that is a challenge, particularly for a developing county. Now, both those areas and those different pieces of information kind of feed into some areas where we can do some detailed assessment to really start looking at what are the needs in the county. One is the area of a flood assessment, and this is looking at flooding in flood-prone areas. Now, when we do this assessment, we look at multiple lines of evidence. We get here what the county has and the cities have as far as problem areas, what the public has let us know, piece that all together. But another tool that we use is what we term a hydrologic and hydraulic model. So this is the ability to do computer simulations to simulate the way drainage works and stormwater runs throughout various areas in the county. So that's what this map on the right is. It shows a lot of dots and lines that connect various infrastructure. And these are channels, ditches, swales, large pipes, cross drains, bridges, major infrastructure that's important the county has an assessment of as far as maintaining it. And we use this information to evaluate the infrastructure. For example, we do what we term a level of service analysis. We look at different infrastructure. A pipe, for example, that may be on a road in a local subdivision is expected to have a design criteria meet be able to 10-year storm. So that means a 10-year statistical storm needs to pass and be managed by that successfully. In other areas, maybe with a bridge or a larger channel, maybe or along an evacuation route, maybe that's a 100-year storm, which is a pretty extreme storm event. So we evaluate those, and the long story short is we identify those key county-maintained areas, do that assessment, and they can identify areas that may be potential for improvement projects or need some improvement as part of a capital project. Now, we do a similar exercise for water quality assessment. Now, we talked about water quality, and it's a little different than flooding. It's not as apparent, but there are a lot of what are termed impaired waters in Flagler County. In fact, this map on the right shows, if you see the yellow dash line, that's the county outline, but then the colored areas with the different things are all impaired waters. And what that means is there's some type of chemical, nutrient, metal, that's bacteria that's in those that makes it not meeting full clean water standards. So what that results in is some action is needed on the part of the county to plan for things that can be done to improve water quality. So for example, here you see some green areas associated with, Crescent Lake is one obvious one, and some of the other areas that are impaired for nutrients, which is nitrogen and phosphorus generally, which are naturally occurring, but when they get in an imbalance, then that's where problems are caused. But other areas, metals, bacteria, dissolved oxygen are issues, so varied problems. But what we do in the master plan is be able to look holistically at those impaired waters, also do some assessment of looking at where some of the concentrations of these water quality impairment parameters may be coming from, again, to try to zero into specific areas where we can look at identifying projects that may be able to help water quality. For example, in many of the waterways that contribute to the lakes, or the intercoastal, or some of the creeks. So again, another area of assessment that feeds into our recommendations. Now, another area that we look at that kind of acts as an umbrella over some of the other areas is this idea of resilient strategies. And what we're talking about here is the idea that there's projections of things changing in the future. We hear a lot about sea level rise, potential projections about that going up, changes in rainfall patterns, more intense storms like the one we had this afternoon maybe. But if those things do change, sea level increases, more intense storms, then the infrastructure that we have in place may need to be reevaluated because it was maybe based on older level service data, or potentially more infrastructure, or does the infrastructure that we have now not work as well in the future? So when looking at either new development, or in the case of retrofitting or fixing or making better what we currently have as infrastructure, you need to be thinking about what may be coming in the future and plan, again, better for that. And again, this plays into also the idea of what future development, when it comes in, thinking a little bit ahead on that as well. Now, these maps that show here are examples of some of what we have in the master plan. On the left, the map shows the county, and the little red dots are the infrastructure that we delineated. In other words, again, the inlets, pipes, et cetera, throughout the county. But then on the right is an example scenario of what the inundation may look like from a hurricane. This particular one is a Category 1 hurricane. So using public available information on what the elevation of that may look like, we're able to use some elevation topographical data to see what the extent of inundation is. Then we can marry those two, the infrastructure and the inundation, to start to look at, well, what may be impacted on certain scenarios. And then that helps us plan for what infrastructure might be vulnerable and better plan for the future. Now, we'll say under the umbrella of the master plan, we did a cursory initial vulnerability assessment. There is a current, more detailed study ongoing for Flagler County as well. So a lot of information coming from that soon. Now, all the information, the flooding, the water quality, the resiliency infrastructure, they all kind of plug into what we recommend is for a CIP program. And CIP stands for Capital Improvement Project. So this is really where the rubber hits the road, and we put the plan together, and we've identified all this information and said what the issues are, but here's the ideas to fix it or start down the road of fixing it. Now, what we have in our process was an initial identification of about 60 projects. These are 60 project ideas that make sense based on addressing flooding, water quality, or both, or infrastructure decisions. Also considering some resiliency aspects. But putting these all together and to saying these are some good ideas to be able to move forward with this plan and start implementing ideas, solutions to make some improvements. Now, with that long list, that's more of a long-term planning list. We did boil things down into a top 20 specific list. And under the scope of work that we had the opportunity to take 20 of those, the ones that we determined to be top ranked, and move them forward through a conceptualization process. Now, what that conceptualization process identified was these areas that you see in this map. Now, in red and numbered are the top 20 areas. In yellow are the ones after, from 21 to, say, 60, are just on there for reference. But a couple things you can note is there's a pretty good geographical distribution of these throughout the county, so we did see needs in a lot of different areas. And I'm sorry, number 4? That is Washington Oaks, committee number 4. And so this allowed to focus these projects, but you see the geographical distribution. Now they're all, here's a list of the table, and all this information is in the draft report that we provided to the county. Again, here's a list of projects, the top 20, a couple things to note. Some are flooding, infrastructure improvement, flooding and water quality. But also in some cases, there's some different alternatives depending on the complexity of the area of the problem. There might be different alternatives in different spots. For example, you see 3 number 7s. That's because project number 7 has 3 possible alternatives depending on how things may go as far as the best placement of the project. Now, all in total, the preliminary estimate for this list is $40+ million implemented. So stormwater management over the long term, or the next 10-year planning period, is not inexpensive. Now, I will say that implementing those projects, there's a lot of things we consider. The time frame to implement those projects. After this, we have a detailed conceptualization. We put some cost to it. That allows the county to have enough information to start looking for funding, applying for getting grants, programming for future budgets to put those in. But as we go through and do projects, there's a planning, a feasibility stage, a final design and permitting stage, and then before getting to construction. So a lot of the capital projects, it does take a cycle of several years to get them on and get the dirt turning and get them complete. So with that, the next steps to completion of the master plan, getting the CIP together, and those recommendations, we did provide a draft report to the county. Here, just in the last couple days, we're having the final public meeting and the BCC workshop this morning, the Board of County Commissioners workshop this morning. So you see that today. So moving forward, what the plan is we get staff input, we get public input, we get board input on what we've done so far, and create a draft final report. That's one more in a compendium of all the recommendations and information for one last chance for staff and the board to review it, and then give the final plan in sometime in September, October, probably the end of September, early October. And at that time, also return to the County Board of Commissioners for a final meeting to present the final results. And this is just how it looks like as far as a schedule. And we did start this back in January of 22. So it was about an 18-month process. So as you can understand, it's a lot of information, a lot of things to go through, a lot of planning to put into it. But we are coming here right at the end here in August, September, into October to go to project closeout. Now, what is next after the master plan? And I kind of gave you a little bit of a preview of this, but it's the implementation of those capital projects. Identifying funding, $40 million. It's a lot of money. So a lot of outside grants, a lot outside funding will be looked for to help pay for those projects, to be able to implement them over a 10-year project. But the intent is to implement the projects roughly in priority order, but that may be revisited depending on how things work with different project-to-project characteristics. But as I mentioned, here's the steps to final getting the projects constructed, preliminary design, final design and permitting construction. So what we've put together is really a plan to give a guide to the county for the next 10 years. 10-year capital program, so successful, but also recommendations for program enhancements. Again, as I talked about, the O&M and other resiliency aspects, code review. And then a big recommendation is what we need to see with these projects is they're not a one-and-done project. You really need to do the projects, and then you need to actively revisit them. And we recommend on a 5-year basis. And that can be revisited by staff or another effort. But the idea there is things change over the course of 5 years. To be able to refresh the capital list, refresh the ideas, change based on what maybe happened is very important. So with that, for the folks here and the folks online can visit the website, but we're going to go into a period of public comment. You're welcome to come up to the microphone and ask a question, and we'll do our best to answer it. The reason we ask you to come to the microphone is because we are being broadcast live over the internet. So we want to make sure to capture, the comment well. And but otherwise, after public comment, we'll also be around for a while to talk informally. If you have any other questions, we have some display maps and boards in the back of the room that we may be able to use and point to, answer questions. Now with that, I do want to hit on and reiterate, we have several ways to get comments and feedbacks. We have a manual form, which copies are available here live, but they'll also be able to access those on the county website, which is here. And I will leave this slide up so that the folks, both live and on the internet, will be able to view it. But there's a comment form. That's the best way to get information to us on your concerns, issues, questions, if you don't provide them to us right now during this meeting. And there's also some contacts of where to send that information after the fact, email or a mailing address as well. And with that, I would like to thank you for the presentation, and I will now go into a phase of answering any questions or listening to anything that's on your mind about stormwater management. And I'll go ahead and flip back to this and leave this up, this contact information. So, Richard, anything else to add? Putting you on the spot a little bit, but.
As Mark mentioned, a copy of the comment form will be made available on our website, as well as this presentation. So if there are any slides or anything that you all wanted to go back and revisit, you can also access that online on our Stormwater Master Plan or our Stormwater webpage in the engineering site. That URL. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, the presentation is online as well. So anyone here would like to ask a question or make a comment? Okay. Right here?
It shows them red. No.
Or the beginning here, let me go.
Yeah,
Well, anyways, your question.
Anyway, my question would be, it's Mike Norris, 2 Lima Place, Palm Coast. A significant problem that we have, and it's a recurring theme over there on the east side of the city with all the houses on the canals and all the water flows east downhill.
In this area?
Yes, sir. All along there, along the intercoastal on the west side. All the houses over there, Cochise, Comanche, all those C-section houses. Big problem they're having is it's hard for them to get their boats in and out of there unless it's a high tide because of all the sediment that's running out. I'd just like to know what your opinion is on the importance of seawalls now, because we understand that the environment changes and there's significant erosion on those lots that do not have seawalls. And I don't know the exact number, but there's a large number of vacant lots, and that sediment's running down into each of those canals. And eventually we're going to have to lean forward and start considering dredging operations in those canals, through grants or funds to take care of that. I just wanted you to, if you could, clarify the importance of seawalls in communities like that. I don't know if you've had any experience on the West Coast or down south for Fort Lauderdale, but if you could go into a little bit of specificity on that.
Okay. Seawalls was not a specific direct thing that you addressed in the Stormwater Master Plan, but indirectly, I'll try to answer your question as far as my experience is, it's very tricky because the idea of seawalls, whether they're for protecting of tide or protecting of erosion on properties, One of the challenges with them is to be wholly effective in any given area, a canal or a shoreline, everybody has to have them, and they have to, work. So when you say things like, there's properties that don't have them, and maybe is that erosion potentially contributing to sedimentation of the canal and affecting travel? That's a common problem that, I've seen all over. Example that comes to mind is Cocoa Beach. You may know spent an enormous amount of money dredging out a lot of their canals in their residential areas, which may not be too dissimilar to the area you're talking about. It's an issue. One of the, I think, challenges is, there's the jurisdictional. Are these private property areas, or are they within the purview of a city or county to be able to do anything? So there's the challenges. If they're all privately owned, you have issues with getting everybody together to be able to, pay for things. But if you don't have a continuous solution, sometimes that's an issue. But I would say there is a precedence for a lot of areas, residential finger canals. Again, I'm not picturing exactly the area you're talking about, but I have a good idea that, yeah, there's a lot of that's having to be done. And sometimes, the homeowners are picking up the tab, but depending on the jurisdictional nature, other times, grant or other funding is available for that. But so I can appreciate the problem. Don't have a solution for you, but it definitely is a issue. Yeah. Yeah, so come up with ideas, and yep, appreciate that question. Anyone else? Yeah.
Kate Komisky, Sea Colony HOA board member. You mentioned Washington Oaks Park. If you could elaborate on how that made the list. Thank you.
The Washington Oaks, one of the concerns there's in the park, there's a series of outfall canals that go north and then under A1A and then make their way out to the intercoastal. In our past, has been some instances of flooding, maybe due to some extreme storm events in there. So there's a general belief that the conveyance is not working as effective as it could be. So when we looked at the project, looked at evaluating through the tools that we had, the modeling tool to look at, is there some conveyance improvements that could be done in that area to help ensure flooding, or if not, eliminate or remove flooding, at least allow things to drain more effectively out there. So one of the projects, that particular project, is looking at, focused on making sure that there's very clearly established outfall canals, maintained well, maybe not too dissimilar to the Malacompra issue with the canal there, but then also looking at the opportunity to upsize or make bigger the culvert that actually passes under A1A to make that passageway more effective. Now, recognizing that those type of issues with the A1A or concurrency with US 1 or other areas, those are DOT roads. So there's an extra level of coordination that usually has to occur with those type of projects. Anyone else? Well, good. Well, we thank you for those here present live, and also for those who've tuned in online. What we'll go ahead and do is shift here live in the BCC chamber to some informal discussions for the remainder of our meeting time. So thank you very much for attending.